Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you with another APUSH video. This is our sixth video on the topic 8.2, the Cold War from 1945 to 1980. Now, today we're going to be taking a look at some of the important moments of the Cold War in the 1970s, mostly looking at the Nixon and Carter administrations. Now, starting with Nixon. Now, normally when we think of Nixon in terms of his presidency, we tend to think of, some real struggles like the Vietnam War, of course, the infamous Watergate scandal. We think of, an economy that is suffering from stagflation. But if we do look at, some of the notable achievements of the Nixon presidency, it certainly does focus in on the Cold War front for sure. And when we think of Nixon, you want to be thinking of the term détente to describe this policy of working with the communists globally. Now, what is détente? Well, détente is the idea of having a much more pragmatic approach when dealing with the communists globally. And this idea of this more pragmatic attitude is going to be led by Henry Kissinger, who will first start off as Nixon's national security advisor and then eventually get promoted to be Secretary of State. So Kissinger's of the mindset that at the end of the day, what do we want? You know what I mean? What is it that we want most? And the idea being is that there's actually something we want more than the end of communism. We want peace. We want the ability to live in peace. And so the idea being is that you could potentially live in peace with the existence of communism if you are willing to sit down and have friendly negotiations with these people, and if they are willing to have those negotiations with you. So Kissinger brings this idea that is very different than what we had seen so far. Prior to Nixon, the government's attitude had been pretty much hardcore containment. The idea of you're going to stop communism everywhere, and communism is not just a different ideology, it is purely evil. It is immoral. It is antithetical to all our values. Therefore, it is wrong. Kissinger's détente policy is more the idea of trying to take away value and judgment when dealing with the communists, but rather look at the communists as just another group of people with different values and working with them to have a mutually beneficial relationship, because our top priority, once again, is the idea of, peace. So Nixon is going to be, kind of rolling the dice on this new type of Cold War policy. And it's going to be especially interesting since Nixon had been known through the 1940s and 50s as a very, very, very staunch anti-communist. And that's certainly going to play into Nixon's role in this. If there was some, leftist, liberal, Democrat president that is going to promote the détente policy, that could easily, be panned as, a sign of, the U.S. is just becoming weak on communism. We're going to let the communists win, yada, yada, yada. But the idea for most Americans that if Nixon is willing to go along with this, as somebody that, has hated communism, there must be something to do with, there must be something to this. Now, another key part of the détente policy being able to work is that we had seen in recent years a deterioration in Soviet-Chinese relations. There used to be kind of a sense that the Soviet Union was kind of the home base for global communism, and then pretty much everybody just was kind of an offshoot of that. Well, China, being the most populous nation in the world, is not going to, take kindly after time of being basically the Soviet Union's, little communist brother. And so the idea being is that China wanted to have more independence, much more of the sole influence of the fate of communism in Asia. And so you started to see, a little bit of this, ruffling of feathers between these two powers. And Kissinger and Nixon want to exploit that. And so we're going to see Kissinger working very hard behind the scenes to set up what is going to be an historic event. You got to remember that back in the 1940s, late 1940s, when the Chinese Civil War was going on, and the communists led by Mao Zedong are going to come out on top, nationalist forces led by Chiang Kai-shek are going to flee to the island of Taiwan. Now, even though the rest of China was now fully controlled by the communists, the U.S. was continuing to recognize the Chiang regime and the island Taiwan as the legitimate government of China, even though it looked kind of absurd when you were looking at a map. But in 1972, Nixon will visit, as they were saying at the time, Red China. He was going to visit the communists. And what this does is really open a very, almost I would say revolutionary shift in the role of China on the global stage, and of course the U.S.-Chinese relationship. Nixon will go to China. He will meet with mostly Zhou Enlai, as you can see here on the left, who wasn't technically the head of China, but he was the effective leader of China at this time. Mao Zedong was a very elderly leader at this time, though he meets Mao as well. And basically what they do is recognize the communist government as the official legitimate government of China. And that is going to have a profound effect. If you recognize a country's government, that means that you are going to, set up embassies in those different countries. It's going to be a foundation for better, improved relations, and it's going to start to pave the way for economic relations in a much more positive way. Now, we don't see the trade barrier end immediately with communist China, but not too many years later, you're going to see those barriers ended, and it is going to change dramatically what the American economy looks like today, and the products that we buy and things like that. I mean, look at how many things you see that say made in China today. And that starts with Nixon's trip to China. Now, this trip to China is going to have a multi-pronged effect. One is it's going to improve relations with China, and of course China is a nuclear power. Having better relations with them, that makes our situation safer. But it also puts pressure on the Soviets. The Soviets don't want to seem like the odd country out. And if the U.S. is making a deal with China, then you're going to see the Soviets be more open-minded to making a deal with the United States as well. And that's going to pay big dividends once again for Nixon and for those that were really worried about a possible nuclear war. We will see in the same year that Nixon visits China, we're going to see Nixon also meet with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev to talk nuclear arms, issues. And this talk will lead to the creation of what's going to be known as SALT, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. For the first time, the U.S. and the Soviet Union are going to make an agreement to halt the production of nuclear weapons, to limit their production. This is a monumental achievement. The idea being is that neither side wants to proliferate the chances of a nuclear war. And if you are limiting the production of nuclear weapons, that's the first step in actually reducing nuclear weapons. And the fewer nuclear weapons you have, the less likely you're going to be using them, which means less of a likelihood of, of a nuclear holocaust. So you're going to see Nixon score some very, very big wins on the diplomatic front when dealing with our longtime communist rivals. So, even though Nixon's going to be associated with a lot of negative stuff, this will be a feather in his cap for sure. But of course, Watergate is going to undo all of that, at least at the time, and we know Nixon's going to be forced out in the summer of 1974. Following the resignation of Nixon, we're going to see Gerald Ford become president. And there were some issues with communism. We saw the Helsinki Accords be created. We saw the Mayaguez incident take place, which, got us, almost into war with Cambodia. We saw South Vietnam fall to the North in 1975. But in the same year as South Vietnam falls to the communists, we're also going to be seeing an attempt by Congress to try to make amends for what had been, kind of this understood global problem. And this was the CIA. Now, of course, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, had been tasked after World War II with basically trying to undermine communist, movements around the globe. And the CIA is going to be effective, and in some cases, maybe too effective. The CIA, of course, is going to be in the regime change business in places like Iran and Guatemala. The CIA will be, responsible for either allowing or encouraging the murder of some heads of states. And so the CIA was kind of seen as this, kind of rogue agency that had been given, in the name of the fear of communism, had been given way too much power, way too much freedom to kind of do what it wanted, and it had kind of run amok. So we're going to be seeing Congress opening up some important investigations, hearings on, the possible abuses of the CIA on a global stage. As a result, the CIA is going to have some of its powers, kind of limited a little bit, but still the CIA, even today, is a very powerful and important organization. Now, the other event I wanted to, focus in on before we get out of this episode is going to be during the Carter administration, when the Soviet Union will be invading Afghanistan. Now, note, the 1970s was mostly, once again defined by the idea of détente. However, when Carter becomes president, Carter is more fixated on the issue of human rights rather than détente. Not that Carter is going to be wanting to ramp up nukes or, wanting to fight the communists, but his attitude is this. Unlike Kissinger, who was kind of willing to look the other way regarding the human rights abuses of the Soviet Union, Carter is going to be of the mindset that, no, you can't just make deals and ignore, the human rights violations of this regime. So Carter's going to be regularly calling out the Soviets on a regular basis, and this will lead to some tension. However, despite the tension, we will still see the Brezhnev administration in the Soviet Union work with Carter to create what we're going to call SALT II, which is going to be an expansion of the original SALT agreement made in the early part of the decade. But the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union is going to undo a lot of that work in the 1970s. Carter will see this as a blatant attempt at a land grab, a blatant expansion of communism, and the subversion of human rights. So in retaliation to the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan, we're going to see the U.S. cut off trade, including grain, our most important item to the Soviets. But that will not deter the Soviet Union from their invasion. So Carter tries an even bolder step, an unprecedented step. Carter will announce in the early part of 1980 that since the Olympics were going to be held in Moscow in that year, the capital of the Soviet Union, and the U.S. did not want to pretend like the invasion had not happened and how it was, a threat to global peace, Carter will make the unprecedented decision to ban the United States from attending the Summer Olympics, which will be a very, very devastating move for American athletes, and it will be devastating for the Summer Olympics that year. But still, nonetheless, the Soviet Union is not going to change its policy in Afghanistan, but what he will do is tick off more Americans, especially those that are in any way either fans or connected to the Olympics. At the end of the day, the deteriorating relations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union gets to a point where the Senate does not even ratify SALT II. And so what you saw as kind of some of the gains made in the first half of the decade under détente starts to fall apart under Carter. And as we'll see later on, in the 1980s under Reagan, it starts to become just downright toxic, and a reignition of major Cold War tensions will be taking place then. But we'll get to that at another time. For now, that's it. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.